Hello, and welcome to the Long Ways podcast. I'm Devin Windelspecht.
And I'm Michael Windelspecht.
And we're a father-son hiking duo out to hike the long trails of Europe and the world. Happy New Year, Dad. Welcome to the first episode of 2023, actually, now.
I'm glad we're back at it again. It seemed like we were taking a little bit of a break around the holidays like everybody else did, but we're back.
Well, this time we actually have some exciting news for everyone listening to us. We've announced, or about to announce, our next trail that we'll be hiking this summer. Now, if you you haven't been listening for a while, we've been hiking every one of these trails every year since, I'd say, 2018? So we do one of these every year. And before we go on these, it's around this time of year that we actually start thinking about what our next trail is going to be. But for starters, Dad, do you want to announce what our next trail is going to be?
I sure do, because it's going to be a challenging one. I'm looking forward to it, but we are going to go hike the Dolomites, in northern Italy. It's going to be a new type of trail for us, I think. Hut to hut hiking this time, which is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah.
So this one is actually called, the trek itself is called Alta Via 1. It's the most famous, probably, trek through the Dolomites. Like Dad said, it's up in northern Italy, like way up there, kind of by the Austrian-Swiss border. And yeah, so we decided around last December, that this is what we wanted to do as our next hike. And we'll kind of go into the reasons we decided that, the considerations we take to go into choosing your next trail, or your first trail for that matter, if you're listening to this and you're interested in taking one of these hikes, but don't know where to start. Maybe the Alta Via 1 in the Dolomites isn't that first hike. For us, it's going to be a challenge even as our fifth or sixth hike. But yeah, I think the first thing to start with, Dad, as we start this podcast, is tell me, when you were coming off the trail in Portugal, what kind of stuff you were thinking about for the next hike? What were you looking for? What differently did you want to do?
So I think the end of the Rota was, in Portugal was really pretty hot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We had walked across basically the savannah, it seemed like, for a couple of days, and was really hot. And you reflect back and what did I really like? And I really, obviously loved the culture, of the small towns we went to, but also really it was the vistas, just especially when we were along the ocean, just these gorgeous, going on for miles and miles of, beautiful beaches and the coastline and everything. And, so I think whenever I think of the next trail, I always want to have that type of experience, those types of visual memories that are going to last. We've never been disappointed in that, even on our hardest days. But that's that was what I was thinking, and I wasn't really sure. As a matter of fact, initially I think we had thought about going to do New Zealand, or even the Iceland trails, and and I can talk a little bit more about why we decided not to do those. Okay,
exactly. I think for me, I started thinking about the next trail. We hike in the summer, and then there's a good maybe month after that where you're like, no, I'm good with hiking. I'm done with hiking for a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And for me, I started to get the itch again around like September, October. So the first thing we usually do, and it's because we use, again, shout out to Max. We use Max Adventures for logistically setting up all of our trips, is that we go on to Max Adventures, or, there's a bunch of other trekking sites that do this. It's not just Max. And start looking at the ones they already have. But for us, we really just started going on and saying, okay, where have we not been yet that we want to think about exploring this time? So I wrote down a couple of the trails we were thinking about. So the first one, and I keep trying to get Dad to hike this one, so maybe we'll do it in the future, is in Iceland. And that one, there's a couple of reasons why we keep deferring it.
Right. I think the first thing you have to do is, you have to know basically what time of year you want to go, because that automatically removes some trails, and adds others. And, we tend to go in the summer just because it's convenient for the three of us to do this. So that's the first thing. Okay. So, Iceland, having been stationed there when I was in the Navy, has a very, very short summer season. Okay. Where you want to be out there hiking, basically July, August, maybe the beginning of September, but probably, not much else. The other thing is that, we've been a little bit spoiled by this Max idea of site to site hiking. And it's really part of the reason why we do this, the ability to get up in the morning and go out on the trail and just, you're just going to walk to the next spot. That's your day, and that's what you have to do. So some of these trails that we've looked at are not all site to site. They're, rent a car, hike, right? Yeah, and then you hike and move. I mean, there's all this. It becomes a little bit more complicated. But I think that we wanted to do another one of these site to site, or in this case, hut to hut hiking.
Yeah. So some of the ones we looked at actually, I think one in either Corsica or Sardinia, which actually looks lovely. I think the reason we decided not to do that one is we had just done a coastal hike with Portugal. Having, a bit of diversity in what we're seeing each time, which is one of the reasons we went on the Roto, because we had never done a coastal hike before, is one of the important things we try to do with this. See something new each time.
Well, technically, the Dingleaway was coastal, but we never saw the coast because it was raining. So,
This is also that, true. Right? This is also true. Also, there wasn't supposed to be. We found the only mountains in Ireland. It was not supposed to be hilly.
Exactly, the mountainous hikes in Ireland, all of flat Ireland except for where we were.
Exactly. The other one we looked at, which I still am interested in, was actually in Slovenia. I'm actually someone who used to live in the Balkans, and as an internship back in college. So I've always been excited to go back to the Balkans. I honestly think that's a trip we're going to do in the future.
Yeah, I agree. That's going to be beautiful. But I think that we ended up wanting to go back to the mountains, go back and do, a Mont Blanc style hike.
Exactly. And for those of you listening, Mont Blanc was our first hike. We did it. It's up in the western part of the Alps along the French border, the French-Swiss border. We want to kind of get back into that. And honestly, we started looking at some of the photos around the Dolomites, and we're like, oh my God, this looks like one of the most beautiful places in the world. But before we go into the reasons we chose the Dolomites, Dad, I have a question for you that some people might be asking. And there are some big trails out there that we're not doing. And the number one and number two of those would probably be the Appalachian Trail and the Camino de Santiago in Spain. So can you kind of speak to your reasons why we're choosing alternate trails? And then I can speak to mine.
I think that one of the reasons is just because of the nature of the hikes. So, for example, the AT is an unbelievably challenging trail, of course, that people do, but it is a backpacking trail, right? Okay, it is. You are going to be carrying everything with you and backpacking, and you only occasionally run into towns or something. And part of the reason why we've become enamored with these types of trips is the fact that we're constantly being exposed to different aspects of the area's culture. The time in the towns is not just about having a place to sleep and get some food. It's also about, getting out, seeing people, experiencing things, on the Tour de Mont Blanc. You were actually in 3 different countries, over the course of it. Even in Portugal, you were inland for a while near farms and back on the coast again. So to me, it really is, the ability to experience the culture and not be carrying 50-pound packs everywhere.
Yeah. For me, also, the Camino de Santiago is one that I've always wanted to do. And actually, it kind of fits what we like to do, going between towns, having a bit of the culture, but as well as like the intense hiking. To be honest, the reason we can't do the Camino, at least the full thing, is the time. Because of work schedules, I have a full-time job, Dad has a full-time job, Eric has a full-time job. It's hard for us to take a month and a half out. Not to say we won't do that in the future, but especially every year. With work schedules, we can take out 10 days, usually, maybe 2 weeks if we really push it. So that kind of forces us to be in the position where we're looking at hikes that last between 7 and 10 days when we're hiking them.
And plus, we like building in that down day in the middle. That's become our we're going to talk a lot more about that in an upcoming podcast too. The importance of, taking that middle day down. And it's hard to do on a 30-day trip without turning it into a 45-day trip, right?
And that's not to say that I wouldn't hike the Camino in the future, or especially like a section of the Camino. But yeah, for right now, it's just not feasible for us.
We've also been a little bit spoiled by Max Adventures, and this, and we are giving them a couple of shouts out, but it is fairly nice the fact that they plan everything. If we're going to do the AT, the planning really falls all on us, right? I mean, and so, and this has provided also a little bit of a safety net too. It's in case something goes wrong, somebody does get hurt, we have contact points, we have places to get out, and it's just ridiculously well planned on their part, and that takes a lot of the stress of landing, being jet lagged, and having to get up the next morning. That they've taken care of it. You're not going to have to worry about where we're going to sleep tonight. we're going to sleep 8 miles down the trail, right? So you just go down there and do it. So I think that there's also, that's why we've stayed away from those truly long backpacking trips.
I think there's also, for us, this is not just a hike, it's a way to experience a new part of the world. Dad and I were both from like literally 20 miles away from the AT. So we're from that area. We know that.
Oh yeah.
We know those mountains.
Oh yeah.
And we love them, but it's not new to us. That's home to us. What drew you to the Dolomites and Alta Via? What were your reasons for deciding to go ahead with this trip?
Well, obviously, it's my tremendous love of heights. Okay.
Exactly.
And my desire to hike up very, very, very large mountains. I mean, if you know me, you know that those are two of my most favorite things in the world. Okay.
Yeah, just to put for those of you who don't know the Dolomites, there's some steep ascents coming up. I have the book in front of me right now, which includes some pretty far drops on the left and right hand sides of your hike.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, Eric's actually going to be the one who has trouble with that.
The next sound will be my anxiety medication opening. So
exactly.
6 months in advance. Really, what it came down to is I really enjoyed. These are going to be much shorter days. Obviously, it'll be more like a Mont Blanc style, like 8 mile days instead of the 14 hikes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the real reason was there's a lot of culture up in there. There's a story about, World War One, this was really the front lines. And when we were in Mont Blanc, we actually saw a couple encampments here and there, and it was really cool. I mean, you get that kind of that archaeological feel to it as well, not just the hike. And we're always trying to do that, just to experience something like little in the town. I mean, even sometimes just going and checking out the church in some of the Portuguese towns and realizing it was built, in 1100.
Yeah.
So, so this will be really. It has a neat cultural. It's really beautiful. Yes, it's going to be challenging. We know that. Okay, we're all training for that now. But
I think for me, it's two things. One is that I've spent a lot of time in Europe, but I haven't spent a lot of time in Italy. And Italy is one of the countries that I've been fascinated with. But, besides like a small, 2 or 3 day trip here and there, I haven't spent a lot of time in Italy. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to spending some more time in Italy in more the rural parts. We kind of get to, as we've experienced on these trails, you really get to experience the culture in a very different way than for being in the big central cities. The other reason is that I really want us to try hut to hut hiking for the first time. So in the past, we've done a lot more town to town hiking where you're staying in sometimes pretty Spartan bed and breakfasts along the way, but you're still like in a town at the end of each day. And one of the things we wanted to do with this one, and it's not every day, so this is kind of our way of testing it, is in the future, are there options for us to maybe do a full hike that's hut to hut? Because if we can figure out that we can do this, we can do like these more mountain huts. That actually opens up a lot more hikes for us in the future. But we need to test it. We need to try it first. And this is a good combination of towns and huts that we'll be staying in.
Yes. And I think that even on the couple of days of hut to hut, I think we only really had like 2 nights where we're actually, we actually have to carry a little bit more stuff with us, to bring it over there. But once again, you could. That's the nice thing about working with one of these providers, right? Is you can kind of tailor that too. You can change it. You're really, there is some flexibility. Obviously, you have to work with what's scheduled and what's available. And if it is the hut to hut, and we've experienced these huts in Mont Blanc.
Yeah.
When we say there's hut to hut, I mean, some of them look like, decent sized ski resorts.
Exactly.
But they're not, there's not going to be a road there. You're not going to catch the bus down to the next location, so.
Very importantly, they always have food, but also beer. Having beer at these places is very important to us.
Yep. And, and usually by the time we're done hiking for the day, to be honest with you, we don't really need to be staying in fancy hotels half the time. You just have something to eat and, you clean up for the next day and you're out, pretty early. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. I think it's going to be a good challenge. I have 2 functional knees. They're both ready to go, so we're ready to go. So
great. Well, kind of going back to the people listening to this, this is our 5th trail now. Let's talk about what you need to start thinking about when you're planning a trek. We're talking about going to Alta Via and kind of like the decisions that go into us deciding the Dolomites. But if you were designing your first trek, this is the first one you've ever done, what would you start thinking about? Just Again, we did it weird because we did it as me texting my dad when I was in France saying, I think I'm going to go hike this. Do you want to fly over in like a week? Maybe. um, don't do that. We learned
Yes,
the hard
that's not the way
way.
you're supposed to do this. No.
Yeah, we learned the hard way a lot of lessons that we had to learn for the future. It was fun, but there's some things we would have done differently. So let's say that you're sitting right now, you're looking for a hike this summer. Right now is a great time to plan that. January, February is an amazing time. You want to have something probably set up by March. But what things would you start thinking about, Dad, for someone who hasn't done this before and wants to start planning their first trip?
Well, obviously, the first one I would definitely, if you've never done this before, I would make it a relatively, not one of the high strenuous versions of the trails. I mean, Mont Blanc was probably a little bit more than we probably should have done for the first one of these.
I would say there's some really just on that point, England and Scotland, although the West Highland Way was pretty tough. That has more rolling hills. It's more of a leisurely trek, and England has dozens and dozens of these. There's a big hiking culture there. So I would consider England for like a first start, or Ireland, maybe not the Dingle Way, that was tough. But Ireland also has some good easier treks.
Yeah, and I think you can either do like a short one, like, do the Rhoda for just the fisherman's way, right? I mean, and not come back over to the historical way. But I think that what you have to do is you got to go ahead and prepare for this and say, what is a realistic thing? How many days in a row do I feel comfortable hiking? And everybody might say, oh, I can hike 5 or 6 days in a row. Well, I mean, maybe you're in great shape and you can do that. But if you're just an average hiker, which is what we really are, even though we've done this, usually after a couple of days in the trail, it does nice to have that down day. So you start to think to yourself, where do you want to be? And you start to look at the guidebooks, either, we use Max Adventures or whatever, and you start to, triage it down to the first trail should be something that you're going to get used to what you have to carry for the day, what you have to pack. We tell horror stories about, the stuff we first packed on our first trip and how much smaller our bags have gotten every time because, you're not really worried about it. But that would be the first thing, okay, is to set something which is a realistic goal to complete and then challenge yourself to doing something harder the next time.
I would also say that, we always do ours internationally because it excites us. That doesn't have to be the case. Again, we're hiking in Canada, North America, US, very different from hiking in Europe. The thing I also think is find a place that excites you. Have you always dreamed about going to Italy? Have you always dreamed about going to Norway? Those, a lot of the places we've gone have actually been because, for example, Scotland and Ireland. Well, Dad and I are obsessed with Irish culture, and we love Ireland. We've been to Ireland over and over and over again. That's one of the reasons we went to Ireland for the Dingle Way, just because it was exciting to us. We wanted to go back to Ireland. For me, I'm really like into more of the Mediterranean cultures, the French, the Italian, the Portuguese. I like that way of life. So Italy or Mont Blanc to me is really exciting because I can be in that. I can be having that experience of being in a culture that is a little bit different from my own. So I think going to a place, finding a place that excites you first, and then looking and saying, okay, is this realistic for me to do as my first hike? Again, maybe doing the Dolomites for your first one isn't the choice. But if you look at Italy, there's a couple of others in Italy that maybe you could do. So those are some of the considerations I would consider.
I want to add one more thing about choosing your destination. If I've traveled all over the place, and often, when you travel, you may get into like a tour bus, or even if you have a car or you're taking a train, you're not really experiencing the country. Okay, you're moving back and forth between tourist destinations, and maybe you may get a hike in here or there. The nice thing about doing these is for this 7 to 9 days, you are completely and totally immersed in the real country. I mean, you're walking through farming villages and people are waving and chatting at you, and you stop in these little stores, and you have to figure out what you're going to buy. And these are things which you probably wouldn't experience, in towns that may not even be on the map as you turn the corner. And it's just, you really get a feel for who the Portuguese, the Irish, the Scottish are. I mean, it's really nice to do that.
The other thing I would recommend doing, if you're between a couple of trails, go buy the trekking books. They don't cost that much, maybe, $15, 20.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll put these up on our site too for you, so you know which ones to look at.
exactly. And we've gone through a couple of them, and we might actually do a podcast in the future that's looking at the different ones. But they're a really good way. A lot of them, especially, I think the best ones we've had have been some of the ones with Mont Blanc was good, West Highland Way. Though a lot of them will actually show you like the elevation changes. They'll at the beginning, they'll say like this is a really tough trek and sit and like compare like two or three. Maybe these are like the three you want to do and you can't decide. Go through and look through them and say, it could be something like, oh, the elevation here might be a little bit too tough for me. But it could also be that you're reading through it and you're like, wow, this day right here looks amazing. I really want to do that. In our experience, sometimes the most amazing day gets completely rained out, as we realized in the Dingle Peninsula, but that's part of the experience.
The other thing it really does take some consideration is, and most people forget about this, but it's really been what's been the most challenging thing is getting to the place and leaving the place. Okay. So most of the time for most of these treks, when you work with a provider, you're expected to get to the first night location, and so, they don't put these long ways trails, right in the middle of, easy places to get to. But I think that, like this time we'll have to go into Venice, then we've got to make sure the transportation's arranged. And don't get me wrong, the providers will help you with that and give you ideas, but, build in enough time so you're not coming in the night before, and having to get up
Yeah.
jet lag the next morning, because it'll just ruin your first day. And if you only have 7 or 8 days, so build in a little bit of time coming in. Also, in today's travel world, no airlines going anywhere on time for any reason. Okay. Once again, if you only have a week off, that gives you really, 9 days, with the 2 weekends, you don't, if it says it's going to take you 3 days to get there, then is it really worth that trip then? So that should go into consideration, how to get in and out and what your timing is. If you're lucky enough where it doesn't make a difference, then that's something you don't have to worry about. Right. So that's nice.
One thing I would recommend people don't consider, or not don't consider, but don't put as an impediment to it, is a lot of times this is different if you're going to Australia and New Zealand. This is an entirely different story. But if you're going to Europe, a lot of people wonder, well, what about the jet lag? Honestly, you're going to have jet lag for the first day or two. And you're going to have jet lag for the first day of hiking, even. But, I don't actually think that that's something that people should put as something that stops them from doing one of these trails. Is it nice to have a day before you start hiking to have a day to kind of get over jet lag? Yeah. But we've gone straight onto the trail, I think both in Ireland and Scotland. And that's just part of the experience, is that first day where you're a little tired, but then you kind of like get up, you have breakfast, you get on the trail, and then by noon, you're good to go.
Like I said, it just comes down to really what your time frame is you have. If you have it, it's best to do it.
Yeah.
If you don't, it's not critical, and you are going to be tired when you first get there. But your first trail should be something that is really, you're going to be able to go and enjoy it, right? And the challenge of getting up every day and doing these hikes, which becomes easier as the week goes on. You think it would become harder. It actually doesn't. It becomes a lot easier. Mentally, you kind of just fall into that routine, like any long distance hiker would tell you. It's just, get up and break camp and head out. So I think that, that's going to be a big aspect of it, is to, how much time you have, can you get there? Okay. And is the trail, up to what your skill level is?
I think the other thing to consider is look at the time of year you can go. A lot of people do these in the summer, and that's actually really good for certain hikes. Right now with the Dolomites, we actually can't really start hiking until mid-July, just because that's when the snow on the mountain passes melts. Similar, I think, a little bit of Mont Blanc, actually, a very similar situation. That being said, we might have gone a little bit too high summer in Portugal last year because it was so hot. So I would say like the best hiking times are probably, I'd say between May and September, maybe October, if you're willing to get like a little bit of like walk in the cold a little bit more. But especially in Europe, again, this flips if you're going to, the Southern Hemisphere, those are really good times to go. I think checking with each of these hikes when the mountain passes become available around what time of year, especially if you're doing a mountainous hike, is important. But really just check like when do people usually do these hikes? And most trails, you'll find that information online. With the Fisherman's Way, which we did in Portugal, I think we probably could have done it a month later, but we just couldn't fit that in with how our schedule was. We really have to do these June, July most years, just again, because all of us have full-time jobs and we need to be able to match up when we can all leave. Otherwise, is there anything else? If you were just looking at someone and you were at a pub and you were having a beer and someone's just like, I'm really can't decide on what trail I want to do. What is there anything else you would just recommend to them, Dad?
Yeah, I actually would highly recommend you kind of reach out to other people who have completed the trail. And I know that may sound crazy, like, how do I know this? But in the world of Instagram, all you have to do is go type in, the trail name, and you'll find people who are hiking it. You can contact them. You can send us an email. We have a contact form and everything on our website. You're more than welcome to send us something, ask questions and ask. We have talked to people who've done these trails. We've learned, like what to pack, how to be ready for the trail, how not to overpack, how to prepare. Yes, I would reach out to people who may have done it, or just find groups. Instagram's probably one of the best spot for finding these groups. And some people are really friendly, and often there's an organization there too. Like, what West Highland Way has his organization, I know, and you can contact them and a website. But yeah, I would definitely talk to people, and and also, maybe find somebody who wants to do it with you. Have a companion to go with you on it. Not 100% required, but it does make it a little easier. Yeah,
and a little safer in case something happens on the trail.
Yep.
As our last question, I think I have for you, Dad. I have an answer, but I'm curious on yours. If you were, of all the trails we've hiked, if you were going to recommend one of those to someone for their first trail, which one would it be?
Wow. Geez, they're also different. And, I think that the two that I definitely would recommend, would be the Dingle Way.
Okay.
Just because, you are moving in and out of these little Irish towns, and it was such an amazing experience. Although, I guess we talked about before, ours was a little off, but that was just a couple of days. It was really very beautiful. And I really think the West Highland Way, where it did have some challenging points to it, right? Hiking along Loch Lomond for a couple of days, and then heading up and seeing the Highlands was beautiful. And there's the nice thing about the West Highland Way is pretty much you're following a train line up, right? So almost every little town has a way of getting to a train, right? And in Portugal, you weren't far from the bus line, so it wasn't like you're going to be out in the middle of someplace, 3 days from civilization at any point. So those would be two of my favorite ones to recommend.
I would actually echo. So I actually have two answers myself. I would actually echo the West Highland Way. I think it's the longest one we've done, and that one took about 10 days, which is actually kind of equivalent to what we're going to be doing in the Dolomites.
Right.
The reason I recommend the West Highland Way is for two reasons. One, it is like just such a classic hike. You really get everything. You get hiking by the lakeside. You get kind of this feeling of these low rolling hills. Towards the end, you really get like this cool like highlands experience. And we're going to actually this is the one trail we haven't actually talked about. And we're going to have some episodes coming up about what we loved about the West Highland Way.
Absolutely.
But I think it's just such a classic trail where if you're really looking to see what a long ways hike is like, this is kind of the epitome of it. I would say that Mont Blanc is that way too, but Mont Blanc is a lot more challenging with the ascents and descents. There are some tough ascents, the Devil's Stairway in Scotland, but I remember like one time like coming over to this valley over by King's House and just seeing like the most amazing vista with these mountains rising right in the middle of this valley. And it was just like, this is what I came here for. The other reason is that, especially when going to Europe, and we've gotten good about this, and we've realized that English and a little bit of learning the language are really good ways to get around. But, for some people who haven't left the United States much, or Canada or North America, it can be a little intimidating to go all of a sudden to Italy or France, and especially not being in the major cities and being in the countryside where people don't really speak the language. Going to Scotland or Ireland, you have a similar language, you have a little bit more of a cultural bridge there, and it's a little bit better of a way to ease yourself into more of the cultural aspects of this, where you're still experiencing an entirely different culture, but you have a little bit more commonality there that makes it a little bit less of an intense break from US culture, for example. The other one I would recommend is if you want to try something, but you don't want to commit to like a week, I would do the Fisherman's Way, not the entire trail like we did, but that 4 to 5 days at the beginning. because just day for day, kind of like pound for pound experience, that is probably one of the most beautiful hikes, those first 4 or 5 days that I've ever done. So if you just want views and you want vistas and you're okay with like maybe being a little bit different of a culture, again, in Portugal, we were fine with English and a little bit of Portuguese on the side. I would really recommend the Fisherman's Way as your first hike as well.
Like I said, feel free to reach out to us. We'll put more stuff up on our website, what the books we've been using, so you can take a look at them and, ask lots of questions of people. And just be honest with you, just plan it. Okay. Go to something like maxadventures.com. Go just start to look, see what you like, the idea of it. Okay. And then look around and ask other people who have done these things. I think that once you do one, then you're going to be as addicted to it as we are. Okay. And we keep doing them. So, and, we're preparing for the Dolomites, which is going to be yet another podcast coming up soon. So.
Perfect. Well, once again, this is a Long Ways podcast. We look forward to speaking and having you listen to us soon.